okay? So let's look at how we're going to get rid of that fat or protect ourselves from ever getting that fat, which looks like a more relevant thing for an audience like you. So here's what we generally believe about weight control. It's based on calories going into and coming out of the body. So calories come out of the body through metabolism and also through exercise, okay? Now, if we're consuming fewer calories than the ones that we're burning each day, then we're going to lose weight, okay? That's the basic calorie principle in a nutshell. So in other words, if we want to lose weight, say today, we now want to lose weight for tomorrow, okay, then we need to either eat less or exercise more or hopefully do both. That's the basic principle. Now, there's about 3,500 calories in a pound of fat. So if you imagine being in 500 calories worth of deficit each day, and you can do that either with diet or exercise or both, then over the course of a week, you're going to have accumulated an overall deficit of about 3,500 calories, which is about the same amount of calories that you find in a pound of fat. So that is the calorie principle in a nutshell. But there's one fundamental problem with it. What? Anyone? Carries out does vary. Anything else? Yeah. Yeah, that's true. That is another problem with it. But here's the fundamental issue with it as I see it, okay? And this is quite common, okay? It doesn't work. Let me just caveat this a little bit. It does work in the short term. If an individual who normally eats 2,000 calories eats 1,000 calories a day, over the course of a few days, assuming everything else is the same, they almost certainly will lose weight. And they may lose weight for several days or weeks or even months. But we have a wealth of experience now and also a ton of scientific evidence that shows that when individuals take a calorie-based approach, whether that is eating less and or exercising more, it hardly ever leads to significant or sustained weight loss. It hardly ever works. Here's a little bit of evidence in this area. These are all studies, basically, long-term studies where they've done something fairly dramatic for relatively extended periods of time. So the interventions, basically, in these studies were either diet or diet and exercise. Now, these diets are usually low-fat, carbohydrate-rich, calorie-controlled diets, okay? These are quite difficult to stick to, by the way, but they're fairly intense as an intervention. And then on top of that, many of these people in these studies have been doing, I don't know, 30, 45 minutes of exercise 3, 4, 5 times a week. That's a fair amount of exercise. It may not be much to you, but to mere mortals, okay, that's quite a lot of exercise. But let's have a look at this study here, third down. This is the result of people doing that for 2 years, okay? Average weight loss with just diet was about 2 kilograms, okay, so I don't know, 4.5 pounds. And here, with exercise added on top, it was 2.5 kilograms, which is what, about 5.5 pounds, okay? Now you might say, well, that's better than nothing, because if you were 5 pounds overweight and you got down to your fighting weight, fantastic. But actually in these studies, the average weight of these individuals was about 16.5 stones, okay? So that's quite heavy. So if you've spent 2 years starving yourself and exercising yourself into oblivion, and at the end of it, you've lost just a few pounds in weight, you would generally regard that, I would suspect, as not a great return on investment. It doesn't really work. But here's the other thing. I've worked in practice as a doctor for over 20 years now, and I've realized over the time it doesn't work, because time and time again, we see individuals who have failed to be able to successfully apply the calorie principle. So what's wrong? Well, there's a general assumption that the calorie principle must work. It must work, okay, because it's simple mathematics, it's simple physiology or metabolism, okay? So in other words, if people are not losing weight successfully in the long term using this approach, there's something wrong with them. Now, either they're being a bit greedy or a bit lazy, you know, they just haven't applied this enough, okay? They don't have enough self-control and they lack, they have a weak will, they've got an inadequate personality, I don't know, all these thoughts. And often these judgments, by the way, are quite self-applied. So over the years, I've seen many individuals who assume because the calorie principle has not worked for them, that there must be something wrong with them. But let me just tell you, it fails so consistently. I mean, practically no one can make this work for them in the long term. You might say, maybe there's a problem with the principle. maybe the issue isn't really that people fail to apply it correctly and are lazy and weak or whatever. It's maybe that the calorie principle is somehow flawed. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking to you about what it is about the calorie principle that causes people to be trapped in cycles of weight loss and then weight gain and then needing to repeat that cycle with more weight loss and weight gain, okay? Some of you may have possibly flirted with this yourselves, okay? Many individuals will flirt with it once they get a bit older, once they get as old as I am, middle-aged basically. People very often are now caught in cycles of weight loss and weight gain. So in a way, a lot of this information might be appropriate to you now, but it might not. It might be appropriate to you in the future. So if you think about weight control in a slightly different way, what it might enable you to do is future-proof yourself from these problems so that you don't turn into your dad. So why do calorie-based approaches not work? Okay, I'm going to go through a range of reasons why calorie-based approaches can't really work, okay? And I'm going to start with this. It's really this concept, okay? If you have a certain amount of metabolism, burning, I don't know, 2,000 calories a day, if you only give the body, say, 1,500 calories, the inevitable consequence of that is that the body is going to burn less fuel. It's like a fire, and taking a calorie-based approach is like putting less fuel on the fire. So you would not expect the metabolism to burn quite as well as a result of that. Now, we know from science that when the body is put in this situation, it brings into play a number of mechanisms that put a significant dent in the metabolism, okay? And there's certain changes in the body that can be monitored around. We'll explore some of this in a little bit more depth later, but thyroid hormone levels. Thyroid is a very important organ that produces hormones that stimulate the metabolism. So you get changes in these hormones, you get changes in the levels of a hormone called leptin, which I'll tell you about later. And also, both in animals and in humans, when you put them on calorie-restricted diets, they move less. They spontaneously move less. They become less active. This is all an attempt by the body to stop you starving yourself to death. It's a normal sort of mechanism. But it can make things very difficult because often people will find after some brisk initial weight loss that their weight loss slows to a crawl and will plateau at a weight way above the weight that they wanted to get to. That's a very common thing that we see in practice. So once you've plateaued here, you're a bit hungrier, you're a bit tired from your exercise, and you're not getting anywhere, and you know you've gone down, I don't know, from 13.5 to 12.5 stone, but your ideal weight's 11 or something, and you get fed up and you will often default back to your original diet, not surprisingly. Very often though, now you've put a big dent in your metabolism, that weight will return very quickly. It often returns alarmingly quickly, and people will often end up at a weight above the weight that they started with. And this is just one mechanism, okay, by which the body can scupper your attempts at weight loss. It's very difficult to starve the body into submission, essentially. Now, this was studied a long, long time ago, okay? Back in the 1940s, after the Second World War, a lot of people had starved as a result of the Second World War, and some American scientists were interested in what you can do to refeed people and get them to put their weight on healthily. So they took a group of men and they first of all, what they call semi-starved them by giving them 1,600 calories worth of food in the form of a high carbohydrate, low fat diet for 24 weeks, okay? Now actually these men lost a significant amount of weight. They lost in total an average of around 20 to 26% of their body weight, okay? However, overall, the amount of energy that they expended through metabolism and spontaneous activity went down by almost 40%. So you'd expect people to have lower metabolisms as they lose weight. They're smaller, right? But actually, the overall effect was far exceeded what you'd anticipate just as a result of weight loss. And so here's a picture of a couple of people that were in that experiment, and this is what happened to them. And then after that, basically, they started to feed them again, which I'll talk about in a moment. But I just want to make you aware of this. These individuals were eating a fair number of calories, right? 1,600 calories is not a small amount of calories. It wouldn't be what I would recommend necessarily, but it's not like they're eating 800 or 500 calories. That's a fair amount. Many, many diets, okay, based on the calorie principle, will recommend that sort of order of magnitude to people, often 1,500 for women, 1,800 or so for men, right? But the effect of eating in that way on these men was utterly profound. First of all, they were perpetually hungry, but not just that. They lost interest in practically every aspect of life. So their libido went, any ambition went, personal relationships went, okay, all of this, okay, is well documented. And they also became cold, they couldn't think straight, they became obsessive about food, all they could think about was food, and they would, for example, chew gum and drink coffee incessantly, okay? And this is all on 1,600 calories a day, which is a fair amount of calories, all right? So one of the fundamental problems that we have here is that dieting, if you want to use that term, makes people hungry. And as I'll explain in more depth later, using a relatively high carbohydrate, low fat approach makes people particularly hungry. And one of the reasons for that is that carbohydrate is quite disruptive for levels of blood sugar, which I'm going to explore in some depth a bit later on, okay? Now, when you have disruption in blood sugar, you can drop your blood sugar, and that can cause people to be hungrier than they should be. It can cause food cravings, and it can cause that mid to late afternoon lull that I mentioned earlier that causes people to need to jab themselves in the leg with a sharpened pencil, okay? So in the first part of this presentation, we're going to be talking mainly about these and how to get out of this trap if you've ever fallen into it, okay? And then in the second half of the presentation, we're going to be talking more about the influence of food and nutrition and also exercise on general health, feeling good, being able to concentrate well, and being optimally effective. Now, after starving these men, they started to feed them, okay? And at one point, they gave them unlimited amounts of food, so they could eat as much as they like. Now, in response to that, some of them were consuming up to 4,000 calories a day, okay? And it seemed that their eating had a direct relationship to their fat stores in their body. So in other words, as fat stores in the body were replenished, they ate less. But by the time they were eating what you might call normally, right, these men had fat levels that were 75% higher than they were at the beginning of the diet. Now, for 60 years now, we've known that applying a calorie-based, low-fat, high-carbohydrate approach to weight loss has very detrimental effect on the body. It has detrimental effect on physical and emotional well-being, and it generally leads people to be fatter at the end of it all than they would have been if they'd done nothing. And yet this is an approach that often underpins health professionals' advice to people. You need to eat less calories, okay? And you need to make the diet low in fat. That's a common refrain. But there's other problems associated with dieting, okay? Here's another one. When people are counting calories and reducing calories, it raises levels overall of a hormone called cortisol. Cortisol is your main stress hormone. Now, we need cortisol. It's absolutely critical to life, but too much cortisol actually predisposes to fat deposition, but particularly around the middle of the body, which is the form of fat most strongly associated with health issues like diabetes and heart disease. Here's another thing. Our metabolism depends on nutrients, lots of different nutrients, you know, magnesium, B vitamins, or whatever, okay? If we eat a calorie-reduced, somewhat inadequate diet, we may become a bit low on those nutrients, and that may stifle the metabolism, okay? And we have at least some evidence, this was a study actually done in women, that when they induced weight loss in people through these women with a diet, okay, just supplementing them with a multivitamin and minerals significantly improved their weight loss, which provides at least some indirect evidence for this idea that if we don't provide enough in the way of nutrients into the body, it's going to be difficult for the body to metabolize food fully and lose fat.